Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. My name's Andrew, and today it's going to be another music theory breakdown. Today's a pretty special one. I worked really hard on this, although I am my own harshest critic, and I wish I could have gotten the sound design even closer to the original. But today we're talking about ZEDD featuring Selena Gomez, Want You to Know. And if you didn't know, ZEDD is one of the legends of EDM and dance music. Now you know. And the reason he is such a legend is because of his sort of like identifiable sound. Hopefully I'm going to help clue us into some of the things in his writing that are consistent. One of the main things with ZEDD, and this is going to be somewhat like vague, but he likes arpeggios. I've talked a lot about arpeggios before. You may have seen my video, Arpeggio Magic, but arpeggios are broken chords, and we're going to see a lot of that today. But without further ado, here's my rendition of Want You to Know. If you haven't seen one of these before, I basically recreated all of the instruments. You're not hearing anything from the original, although I am vocoding, so I can get some of the Selena Gomez feel when the track is smaller. And so again, I wanted to get this close, but I don't spend my time getting the mix perfect because that'd be kind of a waste of time. I think I got all the notes right, and it'll let us talk about the theory. You're going to hear the first verse, the buildup, the breakdown / bigger build drop section, and then finally verse 2. And I'm going to stop it there because we will have heard everything. Here we go. So here comes our drums. Cool. I'm going to stop it there. One request or sort of like critique I've had on these videos is that they're super long. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make this like even more in depth, like an hour and a half breakdown where I go through like every single layer. In case you can't tell, there's a lot of stuff going on here. So I'm going to try to keep it super concise. Luckily for us, this song is in the key of A minor. Those of you that have read my music theory text linked below, or perhaps have taken music lessons of some kind, or have seen one of these breakdowns before, you may remember that key, A minor. A natural minor is our most basic minor key. If you look at any keyboard or piano, like the one sitting behind me, A minor basically has all the notes that are the white keys on a piano. In music, those are our letters in Western music. So the notes A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We use the first 7 letters of our alphabet in music. So again, really easy to draw. Those are the notes from A to A. That sounds like this. Oh, let's solo that out or get rid of our vocoder section. Cool. Let's look at that again. Cool. So that's our A minor scale. Then these are the 4 chords that we find in the song. We find the 1 chord, that's the A minor chord. That has the first note, the third note, and the 5th note from the scale. That's A, C, and E. We then get an E minor chord. This is like a 5 chord, a minor 5 chord in the key of A minor. That has the notes E, G, and B. We have what is the 6th chord, a major 6. That's an F major chord. And then finally, we have the relative major or the major 3 chord, which is a C major. Now, if you haven't seen one of these before or haven't heard about music theory or like aren't familiar with music theory, basically a scale in most music, a scale on the left is used to write melodies and also provides the information for chords that we find accompanying those melodies. We call these chords diatonic chords. That's a really fancy way of saying from the tonic. Tonic is this one note, or another way is from the scale. So each one of these chords only has the notes that you see on the left. You see 8 notes, but one of them's repeated. So it's all one of 7 different pitches. If you're on a piano and you want to improvise a little bit, you could literally make these chords by skipping white keys. So you're going to play 3 notes, whatever white key you play. You'll skip a white key, skip another white key, and that's going to give you a chord that we'd find in the key of A minor. Cool. Let's go into the song and show you all the sections. So part of the reason this sounds so awesome is there's a lot of really good theme development. Now, what theme development in compositional theory, lots of fancy words there, means is that we like music where we can trace, or our ears can kind of understand the development of musical ideas. We call musical ideas themes. You could think of it as like a group of notes that we hear that we then associate with that piece of music. And what happens in this song is the sound design, basically the melody, repeats. It's very similar throughout this first section of the song. There's subtle differences in the notes, and there's more noticeable differences in the sound design, and I'm going to go through both of those. So back to ZEDD and the arpeggio love. So ZEDD's not alone in loving arpeggios. We music fans love them. We'll say ZEDD is probably one of the best educated sort of classical musicians in the dance music realm of super commercially successful producers. I heard him once say that most of the music that modern listeners like you can trace to a small section of classical music, and he is from Germany, so that would make sense since a lot of classical music, Bach, for instance, was German. Mozart and Beethoven were Austrian, but German neighboring countries. Mozart might have actually been German by descent, but I think in Austria they speak German, so very, very close by countries. So we start out with basically an A minor arpeggio. That's C, A, C, E. Then this next note is G, A. Then we get kind of a pickup into the parallel phrase. So a phrase is a group of notes, like a rhythm in music that repeats. That is also part of the theme development, as we would say. It's almost like this da-da-da-da, bump, bump. That's a theme. This next one is a different version of the same thing. We go C, G, A, C. D, E. To D, E. Cool. So again, these 6 notes are in the exact same rhythms as these notes on the left. Every note that we see is from one of those white keys from the piano in our A minor scale. The first harmony, we get like an ACE. That's basically an A minor chord. We hit the G. That's the 7th. If we considered all those notes, that's a minor 7th arpeggio. Then this is still in that minor 7th. That's the 5th note. Then going up here, C, G. This kind of outlines the fifth from our C major chord, the major 3. Then we get an A. That note is not in that chord, but is a scale tone. And then up to a C again. Then the part that is parallel to the D or the G A is D E the second time. So this 4-measure phrase basically repeats until our drop section. Really quickly with the sound design, I feel like with a lot of the dance music artists, it's somewhat easier. It's not easier, but it's fun to try to recreate the sounds. So most of the prominent sounds in this track I've recreated on in Serum. So the main thing about the first one is it's a pluck sound, a plucked instrument. There is some high pass filtering going on in it to get rid of like the lows essentially. I've got some compression and reverb, nothing really that fancy. No LFO controlled changes. I am using 12 voices of the oscillator, so a slight super sort of not a saw, but a multiple voice oscillator. Cool. So in addition to that, we get this chord progression. It's the chords I showed you in the beginning. The bass note is emphasized, so the bass line is going A, E, F, down to C, C, and the diatonic chords, the chords from the scale, are just built on top of that. So this is a A minor, followed by an E minor, F major, an E minor, F major, down to a C major. Let's watch and listen to that. Cool. That basically is also happening on a pad instrument. The pad is playing the same chords I just showed you. They're just held out instead of the quick attacks. So they work together since the start of each chord is at the same time. But the pad holding gives that sense of harmony slightly longer and gives us this smooth texture. The final thing I'll show you is that what I called this ZEDD uplifter. This is a fun thing to build in Serum. I've done videos on Serum fundamentals, building uprisers or uplifters, basically using a bar speed to do all of this automation. The noise is coming up, the pitch of the noise goes up, the synth is FMing from the noise. That was actually a pretty cool thing. It creates that harmonic that you hear, that squeal. Really, really enjoyed that sound. Cool. That's basically all that's happening. Our bass line is doubling up those low notes of the chords I showed you. And that's it. Coming into the part, the verse, first singing section, we basically get the hook without any drums. That's where we hear the I Want You to Know. Our song is called I Want You to Know. It makes sense that that's the hook, right? Now, the way you're hearing the subtle I Want You to Know, I'm using Reactor by Native Instruments. I'm sidechaining to a version I called 4 vocoder. It's a copy of the audio of this track where I basically singled out the portion of the vocal to the best of my ability. So that's how I got that. The actual note information is the same thing as our pad chords. Cool. So we get this 8-measure hook section. Then we go into our 16-measure verse. Same music that's happening in the chord progression. In the bass line, we get an added drum section. So let's play it, and then I'll talk about the drums. Cool. So interesting thing. Pretty straightforward drums. We got 8th note closed cymbals with an open sort of splash hi-hat on the last quarter note every other measure. We've got a clap sound. I'm doubling up with the clap I recorded and made and something from Cymatics. Have those slightly out of time with one another to create the sound of like the multiple attack of 2 people clapping. Then that is on a standard backbeat. in the book, again, linked below, I talk about how drums in popular music follow really similar structures, especially certain drum elements. And the main drum elements, the clap or snare, is going to follow a backbeat. So this is what I call a standard backbeat on 2 and 4, what a lot of people call a standard backbeat, because we find it a lot. We just get one kick drum at the beginning. For the first 8 measures, we don't get any other kick drum, which is kind of unique. We get this giant low-end impact sound. So I'm using one from Cymatics that I'm basically just filtering. That takes a place of a lot of the low end right there. So sonically, it's really small here. We don't have any like true bass aside from the low end in our pad instrument and our impact and kick drum. We have very little kick in the beginning. We then get a kick pattern with some syncopation. That's kind of cool. The kick's on the 1. Then it's basically a dotted quarter followed by an 8th note, which is what the syncopation is called. This isn't like the 4 on the floor drums we get later in the song. Cool. So that pattern basically is a 4 measure sequence. So it's basically the same thing in the first 2 measures repeating. So that's identical. We just get an extra kick drum on the last 8th note, sort of as a fill. Cool. That covers everything up to the build-up section. How am I doing on time? Sticking with it. I'm trying to keep this as concise as possible, but I also don't want somebody to say, like, what was the point of that? He didn't show us this sound that I was waiting for. Cool. So the next section, we get the same melody that's happening. One of the differences is that we go up to D and E. The other difference is where we had a pluck in the beginning, we now have a legato sort of synth. So we're holding out those notes. It's the same pitch happening from the introduction part, but the MIDI is basically just longer. One of the main things that helps this section function isn't just that, but it's this pitch bend automation. So I've talked about this before. A lot of times in our like hip hop music theory breakdowns on the leads, if you access whatever DAW you're in, if you find the pitch bend automation, we can add a lot of human feel by drawing on this line. Now ZEDD is a pretty darn ripping piano player, so it's possible that he just played this lead and did the pitch bend automation with his left hand. He could have also done it this way, which is drawing that in. So you're going to hear the vibrato of these last notes, and that's created by this pitch bend automation on the bottom. Before I play that, just on the sound portion, I have multiple sounds happening so that I could get an even bigger sound of layers. But I am basically using a really similar patch that I had earlier in the song for the pluck, but notice the envelope is no longer creating that pluck. It's not short and like a really quick release, no sustain. And it's 16 voices detuned, and then a lot of stuff happening here. So in the EQ, we have some increased frequencies around 208 hertz, and then we have some decreased frequencies around 748 hertz. So yeah, let's watch that MIDI and listen. Here is the build-up melody. All right, so that covers the melody. Sound design wise, I have that happening on 2 different instances of a very similar serum patch, and then EQing to get them to match. The lower one's even more of a super saw, so I'm using both A and B oscillator, one with literal sine wave, with a saw wave with 16 parallel voices. So a true super saw is what I'm mumbling out of my mouth, trying to say. Okay, so Everything else is basically happening from what we've talked about. The chord progression, the pads is the same. The bass line comes back from the introduction. The sound's quite slightly bigger. We get the same plucked chord progression. We get the same pad chord progression. So the main thing that's changing is our sound design, and then we get this additional layer. This, if we solo out one of these, we'll probably hear it better. All right, this sound was not as on point as the one in the record, but again, in the interest of time, I thought it functioned enough the same. So this is that secondary sort of staccato synth you hear in the background. It's doing scale runs. It's going A, B, C, D on 16th note pattern, super fast. Not quite actually. Oh, yes, it is. Sorry, I had my grid changed. So 16th note pattern, I was right originally. Second measure, we get an E, C, then we get a D, and then we get the opposite of what we did at the end of the first group of four. We go D, C, B, A, so down. And then that basically all repeats a second time. So that's super noticeable in the record, not so much in the breakdown, unfortunately, but those are the notes. And again, all of these notes come from the scale. So if you're trying to write something like this, you could picture an additional player. Less is more. These are very rare. The instrument itself is happening very quickly, which helps that these quick notes helps us hear them and not doesn't have them like overlap with one another, which would make it sound really muddy. Cool. Drum-wise, pretty simple. We go to the 4 on the floor type feel, 4 quarter notes with our cymbal pattern and our clap sound. Then halfway through that, we get an 8-measure snare buildup, super standard for EDM. The first half are the quarter note snares. The second 2 measures, so diminution, that was 4. Now it's 2 measures. Going to straight up 8th notes. Then that was 2, so the next section is 1 measure. So it keeps getting cut in half. And again, the sophisticated compositional word for that is called diminution, when phrase patterns like get cut in half towards the ends of sections where there's change. Believe it or not, this happens in classical music as well. Yeah, so it gets cut in half. We get the 16th notes, then we get a measure of no snare. And that's what brings us into our drop section. The final instrument that we have something happening on an F note, which is an interesting one. That's just our 6th from it. But that instrument is changing pitch, automated via this coarse pitch knob in Serum. It's really kind of an annoying sound. It's like the siren-ish thing happening in the background. I'll play it, but again, it is annoying. So that coming up in the mix kind of helps as a sort of like a build-up instrument. All right, the drop section, not too much to talk about. We could talk about sound design, but since I didn't get this drop as close to the original as I want, I don't think it's as necessary to talk about how I built these basses to not be identical to Zedd's. Unfortunately, hopefully someday I can mimic that sound design. If I go to the lead instrument, this is the most important thing I wanted to mention. It starts out exactly the same. Sound design's even bigger. That's been a common form of theme development throughout the song. But the second time, we almost get the same melody, C, G, A. This was the same. But then we get a different ending. We go, this was all the same, C, G, A, C. Then we come up to B, C. So this ending was different. That's the only really notes that have changed from this melody that we heard right at the beginning. That was something that kind of threw me for a loop because I first thought they were identical, and then I noticed something was wrong with it, and that's how I got to the B and C. Some other stuff that's happening just sound design wise. There's some bass fills happening. That is kind of the growl thing you heard. we hear that staccato synth I mentioned doing the same runs it did before. Correction, slightly different runs, but functioning the same, notes from the scale. Those runs are going G, A, up to E, back to A, right? So all notes from, again, that word arpeggio, from an A minor 7th arpeggio. This is more of a sequential riff. It goes G, A, G, C, B, A, B. All notes again from our scale. Let's play that drop section, and I'll just let you watch the melody. Here we go. There was that B, C. Cool. I'll back it up a little bit. That's where that riff comes in with our toms. So that's a really cool moment of the drop. The toms are doing the same exact rhythm from the drum kit. They're lined up with that staccato instrument doing the sequence I just showed you. I really like that part of the song. The one sound I didn't get totally right, I got something that functions the way it should, but is the second bass sound that happens at the end of every other measure, or the end of the second measure every 4 measures is a better way of saying that. But besides that, halfway through the drop, after 8 measures, we get that snare fill. It's 2 snares in a row, followed by that 16th note tom sound. These are happening at the same times as our synth fill, straight 16th notes, which works really well. Cool. Almost out of here. After we get out of the first drop section, we actually come to something new that is basically a replaced version of the melody, and it's really interesting. This is something that I think like ZEDD does in most of his work that sets him apart from a lot of people. He's not just like looping the same section. He might be looping part of the section, but it is changed. So this main melody, we're still in the key. We go down to E and F, which is kind of interesting. We're playing E as our root note, which makes this one melody sound slightly modal, but the notes we're using are C, B, A, down to E, up to A, and then E, E, F, E, and that basically repeats. Let's hear that. Now that's a lot more prominent in my mix because we don't hear any vocals there, but that is something that if you go back and listen to the original, which I highly encourage you to do after all these breakdowns, after I've showed you these individual elements, see if you can go listen to those original songs and pick them out on your own. Not just to verify that I got them correct, but just to notice these changes that sometimes we don't notice when we hear the song. Even I don't notice until I do these breakdowns, really. And notice that second verse or after the drop section, that new element that comes in. The only other thing I want to mention is just arrangement-wise, we don't hear the 4 on the floor kick drum until the drop. That works really well to make this a point of explosion, a point of impact. So with regards to theory and just writing music, it's not just important to think about like what's happening with each of your elements in a song, but also how those elements come in and how the whole work builds and takes people on a sort of ride. Once you figure out how to write cool melodies, write great sounding drums, mix all of that, then the difficulty becomes how do you take the listener on an adventure, on some sort of interesting experience. And he does this by not having 4 on the floor until the drop section, and then he keeps the 4 on the floor. So it's kind of like the EDMs, the dance party starts at our drop, then it kind of continues through the second verse. Now after this, we get the same exact section that you heard here. So I didn't chart those out for the interest of time. I think I got this done as quickly as I could while still being proud of it. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you found this helpful, you would help me out a ton by subscribing to the channel, hitting the bell for notifications so you'll find out when I make new videos. And if you have any ideas for songs you'd like to see me break down, leave those in the comments. I'm running out of my own ideas. Once again, this was kind of a little bit of a challenge, but hopefully you got something out of this. We learned a lot about Zedd's songwriting and his arpeggios in the key of A minor. So take this on to your own music writing. Again, remember, it doesn't matter if we can explain it or what we call it, as long as it sounds good. Have fun. Be nice to your fellow human being, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.